Okay, I accidentally started that without knowing, but so in August of 2002, I started with my book, Enochian Prayers, and in that book, I started with an initial index that included the history, the invocation of the one never created or born. I'll probably do a video of that next. The light tablet, the pentagram ritual, the Enochian hexagram ritual, the middle pillar, the Enochian keys, the first leaf, the second leaf, from Liber Loagath, the 30 authors, the secret names of God, the 4 great names of God, the names of deity, the ruler, I don't remember what I said there, but there's some other content that I've added over time, and that includes the Noibog, the yes-no, the Enochian Ouija board, which you'll find in my temple. I haven't had much with that, but you see, I have more content. The zodiac names, the Kom Silha, the yes-no ritual, and so the 4 secret holy names, the zodiac names, the great names of deity, the king names, those spirals in each quadrant of the great table, the senior names, the victorious names, the invoking and the evoking names of the Calvary crosses, the governor names, the names of the angels and the light beings, or whatever you want to call them, in their jobs. I have the Tablet of Union, the Enochian alphabet, and some references, and my exit. But the history, I guess, is what one would come here for. The system of angelic magic called Enochian was revealed to the Elizabethan scholar Dr. John Dee and a spiritual visionary Edward Kelly between 1581 and 1585. Dr. Dee had the goal of obtaining lost books, such as the Book of Enoch. The scrying operations extend beyond that, but those are the more essential years. There's different variations of Yod, which is the Enochian name of God, and is with all, is of abundance. It has the numeric value of 19. So he wanted to obtain lost books such as the Book of Enoch. He believed that the book contained a lost system of magic. And well, my specific practices, my personal practices, are what I believe in. Whether or not I'm going to get a lot of views or no views, I do what I'm going to do. I do what works for me. I try to share what would work for other people. The method he used was Dr. John Dee would pray to angels and God for a quarter hour to an hour. Then Kelly would look at a scrying stone, usually a black smooth object that was placed on the ritual table, and report all he saw and heard. Dee wrote this down. A number of copies were made by Dee. However, most were destroyed accidentally by a maid. They were discovered in 1662 and acquired by Elias Ashmole in 1972, who put them in the British Library. They were detailed records consisting of prayers such as the 49 Enochian keys or calls and sigilia, written signs to call upon the unseen in the Enochian language, and the Book of Enoch. And one thing that one finds is a lot of the methods used by the Golden Dawn and stuff like this, you're going to find it in John Dee's writings first. You had the names of the menorah around a circle, and lines were drawn to form the name of the being that one was referring to. Also using the squares to find names, and I don't just mean the governor names. And Elias Ashmole, unlike the Golden Dawn, wasn't just basically getting his information from the a true and faithful relation like Merritt Casaubon. There seems to have been a tradition, or at least the knowledge of manuscripts that Elias Ashmole knew about. In 1582, John Dee was joined by Edward Kelly, who is said to be skilled in the art of scrying, gazing into things, to see what most don't see. And so they performed these series of magical acts to obtain lost information he was convinced would not be found by other means. So a lot of people would not use, I can't perform the rituals till I have hundreds or thousands of dollars worth of scrying tools. Honestly, any scrying tool will do, but if you need a more permanent thing, you have a piece of glass. You get an old picture frame, buy a used picture frame, buy some black spray paint, done. Very good device, large device, and you don't have to spend $900 for an obsidian scrying orb the size of your head or something. The names, books, tables, sigilia, globes, and other information given to them in these sections by the angels they prayed to have been were first used by Elias Ashmole, who used talisman to Spanish rats from their homes. And yes, the method used by Nostradamus kind of resembles the Solomonic method. He had a little dish, but he would dip his sleeve into water. I think that wasn't that how Nostradamus did his thing? So this guy using rats to embellish his tomb later in the 1880s to the 1900. I have books by E.A. Wallace Budge, but I don't know of his magical practices. The Golden Dawn thought of these angels as more godlike than Dee and Kelly did. Some went as far as to say that the cacodemons, elemental creatures, fire beings, who were benevolent when approached properly, but were malevolent when approached in a prideful or disrespectful manner, were to be invoked. Aleister Crowley came up with the calls to the authors, believed to be a form of initiation which one overlapped. Well, he didn't come up with the calls, but he had experiences and he did other things with his material. And yes, nutmeg and many herbs are, symbolic sense to use. And when I go over with the circle ritual, I do have some information in regards to different scents that could be used. Of course, I've talked more about that elsewhere, but so when one goes through all 30 of them, one enters a serpentine triad and achieves transcendence. Well, in a way, your soul is transcendent. Hopefully, by the time you reach, Lil, you're gonna Lil, Arn, Zome, but Ba, Tex could be better for some people, or more in line with that. Some regard Yod, the Enochian word for deity, as two or more in one, like some of the Egyptians, with those such as Nachura Nefri are raw. Nachura Nefri was actually part of the name of a cult that ran in California that saw all the Egyptian deities as one, but just mask of the one. And the most confusing thing you're going to find in reference to Enochian would be the Rosicrucian chess, which is not really chess. It's not really Enochian. It is not really Chinese checkers. It's not really purely an Egyptian or Coptic derivative system, but it's sort of a combination of the two, and even the Golden Dawn tablets are kind of confusing. Aleister Crowley reminds us that many religions bear resemblance to Christianity to ignore it as mere coincidental, while others use this in worship, to worship Set, much like Egyptian Satan, but not a being of pure evil, and the Ordo Templi Orientis, the Ordo Templi Orientis, Sufi mystics and other members have tried to use the system for a purely monotheistic way of worship. Okay, I'm more open to questions at this point, but one finds that there are a lot more beings than one realizes that are connected to these squares of the Enochian tablet. You know, you have the governor names there. I've gone over the demonology, but that's not the only demonology that you'll find, but that's the main demonology of the different areas. If anything, the blank squares of the Enochian tablet, for those that refer to the whole Kek idea, I've had experience where each of the Enochian squares were beings, and there were beings that had color, different things. I mean, you know, different squares were combined, and so if anything, Kek would be those 11 squares without letters that you find on the black cross. But one of the things that the Golden Dawn did is they tried to say it's going to look like this because of these letters are how it's spelt, and this is where the letter is in the word. So you end up with these rainbowy sort of multi sort of things. But the attributes of the Tree of Life and the elements and stuff like this, you go much beyond what is in the material, and you're going to find differences. You can color code things, whereas, yeah, I'm going to redo this in an order that I found. For some reason, fire would be in the north. Yes, the 12, the Oro, Iba, Aozapi, and the other 3 straight line ones. Some people said that's attributed to the zodiac, and people try to say, oh, this is the order of the Sephiroth. But the Calvary cross, you can meditate upon these 16 things, you know, 4 within each quadrant. You know, you got, you know, like that. And you can meditate upon these, and these are the closest equivalent to the Sephiroth that one has in the Enochian system. I may have missed a question trying to show things. So if anybody has a further comment or question that... the winds, for some reason, the fire, you know, there's different orders that the tablets are put in, and there's different combinations, and you're never going to find all the variations of the squares at once. No, these are where to find the governor names, but there is a name. There's 91 names that are found on the tablet. Number 65 has a variation there, and has a variation on all 4 tablets, and that's within the 22nd author. But I like to color code things, whether or not it's necessary. because that's, makes it easier to read. Oh, the directions. So this other tablet, instead of Earth being a north, Earth is going to be a south, and the north is going to be fire on this altar here. And just like the vision that you see portrayed in the painting behind me, which is also experience, this Enochian square is going to be stretched across the top, and I'm no longer going to place things on the altar. I'm going to move it over and use something else to place things upon, because it's going to be a device that I read on and scry on and such. But of course, the east being air and the west being water is pretty standard. But in Enochian, as I said, Yod, Yedon, Yados Momar would be the Christian idea of God. God, God divided. Variations of Yoyad, Yeyad, but they're different names. As I said, there's 32, there's 4 zodiac sort of names, there's king names. You can interpret the governor and the senior names as not being beings, but beings can represent these things. And John Dee, of course, was as I said, he was a scientist that looked into all sorts of different variations of and teachings of different faiths. And it was considered, once they found out that these spirits, Merit Kasabon, the spirit said, no, don't pray to angels, don't pray through angels or Jesus or anything like this, and Jesus isn't God, and some other stuff that they said. Some I agree with, some of it I don't. But I mean, there's other things on the list that you'll find that well, Islam and music, there's different opinion. It's like a masjid or a musalla, you don't play music, even the equivalent of a bell. You silence the bells and whatnot going around, nearby it. But absolutely forbidden. How to start with Enochian magic? Probably just read and just read about the subject and learn the alphabet and read the keys. The 19th key, or the Call of 30 Authors, more appropriately, becomes 30. And, there's different myths that apply to the whole Enochian system, and it's really, yes, you're reenacting the experience of John Dee and Edward Kelly, and there's value in that. But there's a lot of mythology that in the tools and other things that you find, it reminds you of stuff that you're going to find in the Bible. It reminds you of stuff you're going to find in the Quran or the Persian sources or the Hindu sources. And some of it is going to be explained to you because you know something about those Hindu sources. There's 4 different types of Enochian magic. You got the Great Table, and you got the Holy Table and all the furniture and all that preparation stuff. You have the Angelorum Bonorum, which is the Heptarchy, which actually you go through the table and whatnot. The 7 rulers over, well, you got a king and a prince over 5, but there's 49, and so 7 times 7 times 7, and there's a 5th type of Enochian after the Liber Loagath, the 49 by 49 tablets. Well, there's one that's not quite 49. There's, John D. Salvo arranges it like a triangle, like 21 characters or something like that. But there's a 5th type of Enochian that people don't quite know about so much. That 5th type of Enochian is There was miscellaneous things. Like, I don't remember how to say it. It's like, we want to live in our prayers. It's the thing of a spirit that doesn't want to be exercised. You can repeat it over and over again. We want to live in our friends. We want to live in our friends. There's that thing that they, there's this tiny little poem or verse or something that they said, and seas appeared and all sorts of creatures appeared. And I recited it to somebody who was like looking at a corn poster on a wall. And it's like a wavy circle appeared. And I myself, I've seen that reading off that thing. And TFR, you'll find that in TFR. But the secondary sources that you'll find varies per, it varies per your type, what you're going to be into. If you want a super complex way of pronouncing it where you add different letters and you want to give it a true and faithful relationship of what happened between John Dee and many spirits between 15. What was the years listed? But that's what I mean by TFR. It has some mistakes, but if you buy the complete mystical records of John Dee, you're going to find everything of the original sources there. But it's a $130 thing. It's reading an hour or two a day. It's gonna take you a good month to read the whole thing. But that would have everything. But it's probably, you're gonna probably want, if you're gonna go to that extent, if you only have 3 books, you're gonna want a dictionary that has the Latin to the degree that John Dee has it. I myself have a couple Latin dictionaries or dictionaries that have Latin, but his use of English, John Dee's use of English is so good that you actually have to look some of that stuff up. So, if you're going to have a yeah, if you're going to have 2 books on Enochian, that would take care of everything and just, figure things out for yourself. But if you're going to have, some people are more of a Thelema bent. Frater WIT is interesting enough, but he's more Timothy Leary sort of individual. Lon Milo Duquette, you might like Lon Milo Duquette. When it comes to Thelema in particular, he makes the whole thing understandable for a lot of people. But Enochian magic, yeah, his vision magic's going to be easier for some people. If you want to be completely hermetic, or in a more traditional, basic sort of way, the Church of Hermetic Sciences, the blue ray and the red ray, there's a source that starts with a C. It would be good for your more historian sort of going after the Charlottefeld or something like that. John D. Salvo has extra, but not extra to the extent of Schuler. Gerald and Betty Schuler are probably too complex for you to start with. But John D. Salvo has figured some things out. I don't necessarily think one has to go into new revelations like Salvo and whatnot. The Enochian tarots and stuff like this, there's got to be more than one out there. I used it to interpret things, but it's, adding experience and stuff rather than giving a basic thing. Well, whatever the source, if you take it with a grain of salt and try to figure out what the truths in it are, what the value of it is, whatever source is, but I'm not familiar with that author if he has something to do with Enochian. Mark Stavish is mentioned on the book jackets to some of these books, but I don't. Resurrection of the Hero, yeah, I don't quite remember. But it's interesting to look at what Crowley and some of these other people had to say and their experiences and their interpretations. But like with any spiritual path, try to find out what the basics are. And using brainwaves. Using brainwaves is an important thing to do. Yeah, I have a lot more here, obviously. And I've read a lot of stuff that's not here. That's what I'm trying to think of, is I'm trying to think of the Enochian sources that aren't in this thing. But yeah, trying to find the basics of things. It's like with most with a lot of spiritual paths, particularly the big ones, it's like, who has time for millions of jurisprudence readings if they're going to find out what Islam has to say? And it's like, if you look hard enough, everything in the Quran, you're going to find something against that. So sort of the same thing with Enochian, is if you don't look at what the base material is, you're going to get really confused at some of the stuff that people throw at you. Instead of, I just want these letters of these tablets, this is a cosmology I'm going to refer to. These are concepts that I'm going to work out in these ways. Throwing in, you can end up taking a couple lines from the original material and turning it into a big, huge ritual. But it's better to do that on your own. Better to start out small. I've personally adapted saying Yod over and over again as part of my Enochian hymn list. And Shakespeare spoke about John Dee, the quintessential magician that you see. I don't know my Shakespeare too well. People criticize, and the Israel Regardie, he used, wasn't he a chiropractor in California? There was an Israel Regardie back in the 70s, 80s that was a chiropractor in, well, he died in the 80s, but is it the same guy? But he used his information about, knowing the brain and visualizing these things and the way the body works, and used that in his meditations, and your personal sphere of expertise can be used in that way. Yeah, because I'm saying my father met some guy named that. He didn't know these sort of things. I don't know if he visited there, so that's what I'm thinking. I don't know much about Israel Regardie. But I'm lost here. We're talking about Shakespeare. Yeah, I don't know what I don't quite remember. But John Dee was has definitely been an inspiring character, and a recent book takes the whole Enochian thing to a dark point, to almost making it sound like what the Church of Satan does with Enochian, which is not demonic in itself, but people can intend it that way. But John Dee and such can be one of the most influential figures of the past 500 years. But I'm the quality of what I'm having to say is kind of breaking down a bit, but I should tomorrow or something like that go into the Yipti Goat Saga ritual, and I've revised it a little bit because I wanted to use all Enochian names, and I thought I'd introduce that. But I don't know. I only have 100 or so chants from the Maniakas Vama, which is said there, but Enochian, it's easier to find out what the meaning is of what we don't know or try to speculate on that, but I don't really know the meaning of my language, and I've personally found Enochian to be the most, I found it to be the most profound spiritual language. I try speaking in tongues. Sometimes I randomly, I just feel like saying stuff, so I say stuff, and it sounds like different languages, and sometimes I actually find out stuff, and I'm, hoping one of these days people all, oh yeah, you just said that. But, Enochian has its own grammar and syntax, and don't worry about the complexity. Things will build up as times goes. But yeah, sometimes in my I have probably a couple thousand poems I could do separate or combined videos on, but and a lot of that has to do with Enochian, and I intend to share dozens more Enochian experiences as I go on. But that is it for today. Fitharzi Vom Sarg. Peace be upon every one of you.